Pristina. Now, James, are the military activities over for the night?
Well, very nearly, Trevor, but not quite. We are here in a holding centre for armoured vehicles where they are laying up for the night. If you're having trouble hearing me, it's because of the roar of those tank engines. But for the most part, yes, General Sir Mike Jackson has achieved what he wanted to achieve at the end of day one. He has moved close to 10,000 men and hundreds of armoured vehicles up here, and most important of all, he has got his tanks in the capital.
A textbook operation, as you suggest, so far, but not without risks.
Indeed not without risk. There has been a crackle of small arms fire around here this evening. Indeed, at one stage someone was taking pot shots at our satellite dish. Nothing too serious, but obviously enough to make us move here to somewhere a bit safer. And it's likely that the army will come across a lot more of that in the days ahead. Remember, they've gone up the main road so far. They've now got to spread out and actually establish their control of the countryside. Potentially a lot more dangerous.
James, thank you. ITN's Julian Mannion was at Pristina Airport today, where he watched a tense standoff between arriving British forces and the Russians. The Russians, as we've said, had gone into Pristina overnight and they'd moved quickly to take control of the city airport. This is Julian Mannion's report.
At mid-morning, the most advanced unit of the British Army was at a crossroads 25 kilometres inside Kosovo. They were men of the Royal Gurkha Rifles, who set up a checkpoint and searched cars for weapons while US helicopter gunships prowled overhead. And it was here that a difficult and potentially dangerous confrontation began with the Yugoslav army. The Yugoslavs brought up a convoy of heavy lorries and insisted that they had the right to go and pick up equipment and ammunition now stranded behind the British lines. A Yugoslav officer muttered about potential conflict, and his men brought up an antiquated armoured car which pointed its gun at the British soldiers.
At the moment, basically, we've been asked to stop any VJ forces moving south down the road, and the VJ to my behind me want to go further south. And basically, I'm just waiting for some clear confirmation about whether we can allow them to go or not.
And a few minutes ago, they moved up an armoured vehicle and they're pointing a machine gun at you.
We have armoured vehicles by the dozen as well, so it's just another vehicle.
Soon afterwards, the main British spearhead force arrived, scimitar armoured cars and trucks full of paratroopers. The Yugoslav officers stood in their way and told the British commander, Brigadier Adrian Freer, that he was trying to go faster than the signed agreement allowed. For the Yugoslav army commanders negotiating with the British officers behind me over there, today has been a serious humiliation. Until this morning, they were still in control of Kosovo province. Now they've had to come here with maps and apparently a copy of the agreement to try to argue that today the British army has gone a little bit too far. A solution was quickly found. The Yugoslavs were permitted to go and pick up their equipment, and the British army moved forward across country towards the airport. On the way, more encounters with sullen Yugoslav troops still encamped in burnt-out Albanian villages, where every obstacle on the road had to be checked for booby traps. It was a foretaste of what will clearly be a difficult peacekeeping operation. Julian Mannion, ITN, Pristina.
And a few minutes ago, I spoke to Julian Mannion in central Pristina. Julian's, are the Russians still very much in evidence in the city?
Well, we understand that the Russians are still camped at the airport. They're no longer in the city since their tumultuous arrival here in the middle of last night. They went to the airport, they camped there, and apparently they're still there. We're with the British now because the British column, this spearhead column, which I accompanied on a winding journey through the burnt-out villages of the Albanian countryside to get to the southern side of the airport perimeter, they found them there, and Brigadier Freer, the commander of this group, went in to negotiate with the Russians, and it seems that they haven't come to any firm conclusions. Because a little bit later, when General Jackson came there to give a press conference, it appears that the press conference was disturbed by the Russian soldiers revving up the engines of their APCs. Very large machines, these, capable of generating a lot of noise. It doesn't seem to be a particularly amicable act, or one that indicates there's going to be a quick, smooth solution to the Russian presence.
And Julian, what's the mood among the Serbian population there tonight?
Sullen, I think, grim are the two best words to describe it. We saw that all day today. They didn't like, for example, having their cars searched by the Gurkha soldiers at the roadblocks. A few of the children waved at the passing soldiers, but tonight again we've had disturbing reports of Serbs attacking Albanians in an Albanian district of the city where some Albanians still live. Overall, the Serbs are grim.
Julian Mannion, thank you. When the Russians went into Pristina last night, they caused alarm and confusion in Washington. American and Russian officials are now struggling to clarify Russia's role in Operation Joint Guardian. President Clinton says he's looking forward to working with the Russians, and Defense Secretary William Cohen has said the Russians can join the peacekeeping force as long as they understand who is in charge. Here's ITN's Robert Moore.
In the early hours of this morning, to the near disbelief of NATO commanders, the Russians arrived in Kosovo's capital, Pristina. The Russian soldiers received a euphoric welcome from ethnic Serbs. They had beaten NATO forces to the city by several hours and immediately positioned themselves at the airport, the most militarily sensitive location of all. It remains an extraordinary sight, the Russian military convoy still in Kosovo at the airport, showing no signs of pulling back. It appears that troops were ordered into the province at the insistence of military hardliners in Moscow and without the knowledge of the Russian Foreign Ministry. Not only does it hint of a political struggle in Russia, it also jeopardizes NATO's attempt to establish a clear command structure for the troops now pouring into Kosovo. In Moscow, frantic efforts were underway to try and end the confusion. America's Deputy Secretary of State Strode Talbot struggling to agree a military deal that would satisfy the Russians. President Yeltsin was attending ceremonies in the Kremlin amid reports that Moscow was also going to send in further reinforcements. The Foreign Minister Igor Ivanov has said it was all a mistake and the Russian troops would pull out, but it seems he has been kept in the dark or outmaneuvered by military hawks. The West, although clearly stunned by these twists, was trying hard to talk the drama down.
I don't think it's a matter of great consequence that a small number of Russian troops allowed their enthusiasm for joining the peacekeepers to overcome their military discipline.
We again looked at it very carefully last night. We saw that it was a fairly small force. We knew that it was militarily insignificant. We also knew that our forces are going in as they are today.
But if the Russian gesture was intended to reassure Kosovo's ethnic Serb population, there are few signs it's working. Serbs continue to flee Kosovo in the aftermath of Belgrade's military withdrawal. The immediate diplomatic push now is to end the confusion and potential dangers that flow from that dramatic unilateral Russian move into Kosovo. After so much intricate planning, it was the one action the West had not anticipated. Robert Moore, ITN.
Now, Robert, are the international tensions of the last few days subsiding?
Well, strenuous efforts are underway tonight to try and contain the crisis, Trevor. In military terms, the Russian contingent is of not great military significance. It's a few hundred as opposed to the tens of thousands of NATO troops now pouring over the border. But it's serious in the sense that it jeopardizes the all-important clarity of the command structure for NATO. And let's remember, this is a very complex, multinational military and logistical effort. And what NATO is determined to try and avoid is any confusion or ambiguity that would send the wrong signals to the refugees and might persuade some of them to regard the environment as too insecure to return home in.
Robert, given that, what happens next on the diplomatic front?
Well, there'll be a big push now to try and integrate these Russian troops into KFOR on the ground. NATO is determined, however, that Russia does not establish a zone of control. That would hint of partition and is regarded as wholly unacceptable to the West.
Robert Moore, thank you. As word of the NATO push into Kosovo spread, so did the celebrations among the thousands of ethnic Albanian refugees in camps along the borders. They'd earlier been sent a message from President Clinton. He told them, "You will be going home." Bill Neely sent this report from Kukes in Albania.